Hobbit Chapter 2. Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo and put on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody but all the signs of a large and very hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room and piles of unwashed pans in the kitchen. Nearly every pot he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, and as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved, after all, to think that they'd all gone without him and without bothering to wake him up. And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a little disappointed. The feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, "thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By that time, the sun was shining and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," said he, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you a message, because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephants," said Gandalf. "You're not at all yourself this morning. You never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I've had enough to do with washing up for 14 people. "If you dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note. This is what it said. "Thorn and Company to Burglar Bilbo, greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks. For your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms are cash on delivery up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or representatives if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed sleep, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations. Shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn in Bywater City at 11 a.m. sharp. Trust that you will be punctual. We have the honor to remain yours deeply, Thorn and Company." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You'll have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo again. "No time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he'd found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him, down the street, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater just at the stroke of 11, and found he'd even come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo!" said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then all the others came round the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you two get! Off we go!" said Thorn. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I have to come without my hat, and I have left my pocket handkerchief, and I haven't got any money. I didn't get your note until 10:45, to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Dwellin, "and don't worry. You'll have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and many other things before you get to the end. As for a hat, I've got a spare hood and cloak in my luggage." That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before the month of May, on laden-down ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood and cloak borrowed from Dwellin. They were too big for him, and he looked rather funny. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I dare not think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, since he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when up came Gandalf, very splendid, on a white horse. He had bought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after that, the party went along very merrily, and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them to, but still he began to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first, they passed through Hobbit lands, a wide, respectable country inhabited by decent folk with good roads, an inn or two, now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they'd gone on far into the lone lands, where there was no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they'd been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been as good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lowlands, they had been obliged to camp where they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it will soon be June," grumbled Bilbo as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. In the afternoon tea time, it was pouring with rain, and had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes. His cloak was full of water. The pony was tired and stumbled on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk. "And I'm sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and food bags," thought Bilbo. "Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was at home in my nice hole by the fire with the kettle that just beginning to sing." It was not the last time that he wished that. Still, the dwarves jogged on, never turning round or taking any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the gray clouds, the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark as they went down into the deep valley with a river at the bottom. Wind got up, and willows along its banks bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind broke upon the gray clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. Then they stopped, and Thorn muttered something about supper, and "Where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on?" Not until then did they notice Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he simply was not there at all. "Just when a wizard would have been most useful, too," groaned Dori and Nori, who shared the hobbit's view about regular meals, plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees and thought it was drier under them. The wind shook the rain off the leaves, and the drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have gotten into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere out of anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night, not even Oin or Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted away. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out, Philly and Killy had nearly drowned, and all the baggage he was carrying washed away. Of course, it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper, and even less for breakfast. Then they all sat glum and wet and muttering, while Oin and Gloin went on trying to light the fire and fighting about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures were not all pony rides in May sunshine when Balin, who was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there." There was a hill some way off with trees on it, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of trees they could see a light shining, a reddish, comfortable-looking light, as if it might be a fire or torches. When they looked at it for some while, they fell to arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said they could go and look and see, and everything was a bit better than a little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes. Others said, "These parts are known too well, and none near the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way now. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for the worse, and the roads unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king around here, and the less inquisitive you go along, the less trouble you're likely to find." Some said, "After all, there's 14 of us." Others said, "Where's Gandalf got to?" This remark was repeated by everyone. Then the rain began to pour down harder than ever, and Oin and Gloin began to fight in earnest. That settled it. "After all, we've got a burglar with us," they said, and so they made off, leading their ponies in the direction of the light. They came to the hill and were soon in the wood. Up the hill they went, but there was no proper path, such as might lead to a house or farm, or do what they could. They made a deal of rustling and cracking and creaking as they went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly, the red light shone out of very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. "Now it's the burglar's turn," they said, meaning Bilbo. "You must go on and find out all about that light, and what it's for, and all if all is perfectly safe and canny," said Thorin to the hobbit. "Now scuttle off, and come back quick if all's well. If not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl, and once like a screech owl, and we'll do what we can." Off Bilbo had to go. Before he could explain, he could not hoot even once like any kind of owl, any more than fly. But at any rate, hobbits can move quietly in the woods. They can take pride in it, and Bilbo had sniffed more than once at what he called all this dwarvish racket as they went along, although I don't suppose you or I would have noticed anything on a windy night, not if the whole cavalcade had passed 2 feet off. As for Bilbo walking primly towards the red light, I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it, so naturally he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anything, and this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting around a very large fire. They were toasting mutton on long sticks of wood and licking the gravy off their fingers. There was a fine, toothsome smell. Also, there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls. Obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that. From the great, heavy faces of them and their size and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing room fashion at all.
Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow,
said one of the trolls.
Never a blinking bit of man-flesh have we had for long enough,
said a second.
What the hell William was a thinking of to bring us into these parts? It all beats me. And the drink's running short, what's more,
he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked.
Shut your mouth,
he said as soon as he could.
You can't expect to stop to here ever just to be et by you and Bert. You've et a village and a half between you since we come down from the mountains. How much more do you want?
Time's been our way when you'd have said thank you, Bill, for a nice bit of fat valley mutton was like this. He took a big bite off a sheep's leg he was roasting and wiped his lips on his sleeve. Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, even though with only one head each. After hearing all this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there were 3 fair-sized trolls at hand in a very nasty mood, likely to try roasted dwarf or even pony, or else he should have gone and got a bit of good quick burgling done. A real first-class and legendary burglar would have at this point at least picked the trolls' pockets, pinched the very mutton off the spits, purloined their beer, and walked off without their noticing. Others, more practical, but with less professional pride, would perhaps stuck a dagger in each of them before they observed it. Then the night would have at least been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He dreaded a good many things he'd never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go back to Thorn and company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglarious proceedings he'd heard of, picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult, so at last he crept behind a tree just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up enough courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it as big as a bag to Bilbo. Ha! Thought he, warming to his new work as he lifted it carefully out. This is a beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. Hey, who are you? It squeaked as it left the pocket, and William turned around at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind the tree.
Blimey, Bert, look what I've got,
said William. What is it? Said the others, coming up.
Lummy if I knows, what are you?
Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit, said poor Bilbo, shaking all over and wondering how to make owl noises before they killed him.
A hobbit,
said they, a bit startled. Trolls are slow on the uptake and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. What's a hobbit got to do with my pocket anyways? Said William.
And can you cook 'em?
Ye can try, said Bert, picking up a skewer. He wouldn't make a mouthful, said William, who had already had a fine supper. Not when he's skinned and boned.
Perhaps there's more like 'em round about, and we could make a pie, said Bert. Here, you, are there any more of your sort sneaking round in these woods, you nasty little rabbit?
Said he, looking at the hobbit's furry feet, and picked him up by the toes and shook him. Yes, lots, said Bilbo, before he remembered not to give his friends away. I mean, none at all, no one, he said right afterwards.
What do you mean? Said Bert,
holding him right way up by the hair this time. What I say, said Bilbo, gasping. And please don't cook me. Kind sirs, I'm a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, a perfectly beautiful breakfast, if only you won't have me for your supper.
Poor little blighter,
said William. He'd already had as much supper as he could hold, and also lots of beer.
Poor little blighter, let him go.
No, not till he says what he means by lots and none at all, said Bert. I don't want to leave me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes in the fire till he talks.
I won't have it, said William. I caught him anyway.
You're a fat fool, William, said Bert, as I've said afore this evening.
And you're allowed.
I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins, said Bert, and put his fist in William's eye. There was a huge fight. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs, and calling one another all sorts of truly horrible names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms, rolling, nearly fire, kicking, thumping, while Tom whacked at them with both a branch to bring them to their senses, and that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the great time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been squashed in Bert's big hands, and he has no breath left in his body. His head was spinning around, So there lay for a while, panting. There he lay for a while, panting, just outside the circle of light. Right in the middle of the fight, up came Balin. The dwarves had heard noises from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Oh! Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately and said, "A sack, Tom, quick!" they said, before Balin, who was wondering where in all this commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening. A sack was over his head, and he was down.
"There's more to come yet,"
said Tom.
"Or I mighty mistook. Lots and none at all, it is," said he. "No burr hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves, that's about the shape of it."
"I reckon you're right," said Bert, "and we best get out of the light." And so they did, with sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder, waited in the shadows. As each dwarf came up and looked at the fire and the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton, in surprise, pop, went a nasty-smelling sack over their head, and they were down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin, and Philly and Killy together, and Dory and Nori and Ori all in a heap, and Oin and Gloin and Biffer and Bofer and Bomber piled uncomfortably near the fire.
"That'll teach 'em,"
said Tom, for Biffer and Bober had given a lot of trouble and fought like mad, as dwarves will when cornered. Thorin came last, and he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out of the sacks to tell him things were not well. He stood outside in the shadows some way off and said, "What's all this trouble? Who's been knocking my people about?" "It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind a tree. They had forgotten all about him. "They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," said he.
"Who are they?"
said Thorin, and he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught up a big branch all on fire on one end. Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up into one of the top bushes when Tom kicked the sparks in Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that and lost one of his front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just at that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes. And so the fight was ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, neatly tied up in sacks, with 3 angry trolls sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jellies. Then Bilbo was in the bush, with his clothes and his skin torn, not daring to move for fear they should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back. No one saw him, but the trolls had just decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea. After a long argument, they had all agreed to it.
"No good roasting them now, it would take all night," said a voice.
Bert thought it was William's.
"Don't start the argument all over again, Bill,"
he said,
"or it'll take all night."
"Who's arguing?" said William, who thought it was Bert that had spoken.
"You are."
"You're a liar," said William, and so the argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them, so they got a great black pot and took out the knives.
"No good boiling, and we ain't got no water,
and it's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's.
"Shut up,"
they said, "and we'll never have done. And you can fetch the water yourself if you say any more."
"Oh, shut up yourself,"
said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. "Who's arguing but you, I'd like to know?"
"You're a booby."
"Booby yourself," said Tom. And so the argument began all over again, and went on hotter than ever until at last they decided to sit on the stacks one at a time and squash them and boil them next time.
"Who shall we sit on first?"
said the voice.
"Better sit on the last fellow first,"
said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking.
"Don't talk to yourself,"
said Tom.
"If you wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he? The one with the yellow stockings?"
"Nonsense, the one with the grey stockings," said a voice that sounded like William's.
"I made sure it was yellow."
"Yellow it was," said William.
"Then what'd you say grey for?"
said Bert. "I never did. Tom said it."
"That I never did,"
said Tom. "It was you."
"'Twas the one, so shut your mouth,"
said Bert. "Who are you talking to?" said William.
"No, stop it," said Tom and Bert together. "The night's getting on and dawn comes early. Let's get on with it."
"Dawn take you all and be stoned to you,"
said a voice that sounded like William's. But it wasn't, for just at that moment the light came over the hill and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to stone as he stooped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him. And there they stood, to this day, all alone, unless the birds perch on them. For trolls, as you should have known, must be underground before dawn, for they go back to the stuff of the mountains that they are made of, and they never move again. And this is what happened to Bert and Tom and William. Excellent, said Gandalf, and he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo to climb down out of the bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls fighting and quarreling until the light came and made an end to them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squishing and mincing them. They had had to hear Bilbo's account of what had happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. Silly time to go practicing pinching and pickpocketing, said Bomber, when what we wanted was fire and food. And that's just what you wouldn't have gotten out of those fellows without a struggle in any case, said Gandalf. Anyway, you're wasting time. Don't you realize the trolls must have a cave or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it. They searched about and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by the bushes, they came on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, not though they'd pushed, while Gandalf tried various incantations. Would this be any good? Asked Bilbo when they were getting tired and angry. I found it on the ground when the trolls had their fight. He held out a large key, though no doubt William had thought it very small and trinket. It must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he was turned to stone. Why on earth didn't you mention it before? They cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fit it into the keyhole. Then the stone door swung back with one big push, and they went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell in the air. But there was a good deal of food, jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground amongst an untidy litter of plunder, all sorts of brass buttons and pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There was a lot of clothes, too, hanging on the wall, too small for trolls. I'm afraid they belonged to their victims, and among them several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Two caught their eyes particularly because of their beautiful scabbards and hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for the hobbit.
These look like good blades, said the wizard, half drawing them and looking at them curiously. They were not made by any troll, nor by any smith among men in these parts or days. But when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them.
Let's get out of this horrible smell,
said Philly. So they carried out the pots of coins and such food as went untouched and looked fit to eat. Also a barrel of ale, which was full. By that time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn their noses up at what they had gotten from the troll's larder. Their own provisions were very small. Now they had bread and cheese and plenty of ale and bacon to toast in the embers. After that they slept, for their night had been very disturbed, and they did nothing more till the afternoon. Then they brought up their ponies and carried away the pots of gold and buried them very secretly, not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them, just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover the pots. When that was done, they all mounted once more and jogged along on the path towards the east.
Where did you go to, if I may ask? Said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along.
To look ahead, said he.
And what brought you back in the nick of time?
Looking behind, said he.
Exactly, said Thorin. But could you be more plain?
I went to spy out our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing a small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell.
Where's that? Asked Bilbo.
Don't interrupt, said Gandalf. You'll get there in a few days, now if we're lucky, and find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of the trolls. It was they who told me that 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from the road. They'd frightened everyone away from the district and waylaid travelers. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere.
Thank you,
said Thorin.